I am now started the recording, and I'll keep an eye on others who might be in the waiting room. And I would just say, by way of introduction, and we'll turn this over to our board members and then Jason, to you and your team, that I've been working as a consultant with the Kansas CIT Association Board for a year or so. One of their recent discussions has been some talk about formalizing their organization, possibly incorporating and going after 501c3 status. This was an organization whose bylaws were adopted and the board was formed back in 2018, and we're starting to make some progress. We have 9, as I recall, 9 local CIT councils in the state, some more robust than others. And Jeff and Aaron and Gladys are from different areas of the state where we have local councils. And as I had pointed out in a message to Jason when we invited him to join us, that we had a couple representatives, I think maybe back in 2015 or 2016 from Missouri, who did a presentation at our annual CIT summit. And I think there were some indications then that, there were some things about your structure and your relationship with the state agencies and with the local councils that we might learn from. And before we make any major mistakes, I thought it would be a good idea to kind of get everybody together. So with that, and we'll let Jeff and Aaron and Gladys add anything to that brief intro as they introduce themselves, and then we'll turn it over to you, Jason and Angie and Kimberly. So we'll start Aaron and then Gladys and then Jeff.
Great, yeah, thanks. Well, one, I appreciate you guys being here. Thanks for allowing us to join in. I've been on the CIT board for just a short period of time, but I currently serve as the clinical director of our of Health Source, which is a essentially a televideo service that provides crisis services across the state of Kansas. So we work closely with hospitals and law enforcement agencies, et cetera. I primarily live in Douglas County, which is Lawrence, Kansas, and I have been very involved in the community around crisis services and the involvement with the CIT team there. So.
There you go.
Be on my phone. There I am. Good morning, everybody. I am Gladys Williams, and I am currently in a new position within the Sheriff's Department. I'm so used to introducing myself on behalf of ComCare. I was with them for about 15 years, so still within the county structure of Sedgwick County, but just shifted over to the Sheriff's Department about a couple months ago now. So I am the new department therapist, so new wellness unit that was just created a couple years ago. And so it's still evolving and developing. And one of the biggest things was to get a therapist on board. And that is my role, is to kind of help get that going. And I've been on our Sedgwick County CIT for, about 8 years plus, I believe. And then obviously on this state board since it developed back in 2018. So I am definitely still adjusting to my new role, but not new to working obviously within CIT framework. Coming from ComCare, the crisis was where I spent most of my time at. Also spouse of law enforcement, who was with WPD for about 12 years and now teaching in reserve. So kind of been a big part of my life for a long time, and looking forward to hearing and learning more from you all today.
Well, thank you, Gladys. And Jeff?
Good morning, guys. Thanks for being here. I appreciate your time. My name is Jeff Robinson. I work with the Wyandotte Center here in Wyandotte County. I've been with the Wyandotte Center since 2008, before we instituted our CIT program. We instituted that about 2012. About 2013, I started doing the jail and court liaison position. Did that for 7 years. And, now currently I'm the team coordinator for our ACT team, Assertive Community Treatment Team. One of our crisis branches is our CIT co-responder who, Jason, you may have met both Nicole Ortego from KCKPD and Andrea Kessler is our CIT co-responder. So they are also connected because our team falls under the crisis umbrella for our center. So we're working hand in hand with those guys a lot. I've been involved in the board since I think it was 2019, Rick, correct me if I'm wrong. Mandy Rosenbaum was my supervisor back in 2018, and she was actually holding the seat back then when she was our initial CIT co-responder. But currently that's where I'm at now. I am also on this board as well as our local board, as well as Katie Yarslick, who's with KCKPD, Captain Yarslick. So she sits on that board as well with us.
Great. And so what we have today from the board are all of our behavioral health representatives. The board includes a number of law enforcement representatives. Sorry that they're not with us, but they'll get a chance to listen in. And in addition, we have 2 at-large board members, one who represents our state behavioral health agency, KDADS, and the other represents the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center in Hutchinson, Kansas. So Jason, let me turn it over to your team, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Yeah, no, so I'm excited already because Aaron, you talked about a statewide like tele-assessment service. So that sparked my interest. Gladys, I want a therapist so bad, you know, from a peer wellness standpoint. So great there. And then Jeff, obviously we need to move more towards a statewide co-responder model. So I'm excited to learn more from you guys than you may get from me today. So really awesome with that. So I'll let Angie and then Kimberly introduce themselves, and then we'll kind of go through an updated PowerPoint of the Missouri model, if that's okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Angie Plunkett. I'm the diversion coordinator for the Missouri Department of Mental Health. And I apologize, I'm getting notices that my internet is unstable. I don't know what's going on with that because I pay about $140 a month for my internet service. So I work with about 5 initiatives in the state. So one of those is the Community Behavioral Health Liaisons, which are dedicated positions in Missouri that connect law enforcement and the courts with behavioral health resources. I'm not sure that any other state has that position, and I do think that they're integral in our statewide expansion and the success of CIT in Missouri. I'm also the court liaison to the department. I was the former statewide drug court coordinator, so I provide those services and connections with our drug courts to the behavioral health entities in the state. I am overseeing the behavioral health crisis centers. So we just got approval to put a crisis center in each of the highway patrol troops around the state, and then also serve as the liaison for CIT. And Gladys, I'm also a spouse of a law enforcement officer for over 30 years. So thanks for letting me be part of this. And CIT is amazing. I love working with Kimberly and Jason, and I hope you guys learn a lot.
Good morning, everyone. Kimberly Hicks. I've been with the Missouri Behavioral Health Council through 2 name changes. It's been, August will be 9 years. The CBHLs have also had a name change. They were initially known as the Community Mental Health Liaisons. I supervised that initiative along with CIT for about 4 years. I'm the Missouri CIT program manager. The best way I can describe that is I'm the civilian counterpart to Detective Klaus. I do all things administrative for CIT, and it is full-time now with the growth of the CBHL program going from 50 to 81. It was just too much for one person to manage, so we divided those programs up. I would just like to also mention that initially when we had the CBHL initiative, we didn't have any co-responder positions. A lot of people referred to them as co-responders, but we have since onboarded true core co-responders in a lot of the agencies but that's been done independently. Typically with a lot of the police departments, they have actually created those positions. But we also help we help assist them with some of the work that they do. We allow them to participate in our CBHL quarterly meetings, just so that we have some consistency and cohesiveness with that group, even though we do not manage them. And thank you very much for allowing us to be a part of your meeting today.
I don't know that Kim's definition of a counterpart is the same as mine, because I do whatever she tells me to do. A counterpart is side by side. So I just wanted to clarify. My name is Jason, and I again appreciate this opportunity for our team to meet with yours, and more so for me to learn from you guys as well, for sure. I'm 25 years in law enforcement. I've had many different roles during that time. CIT first came to me when I was in a detective role, and truly changed the way that I went about my job every single day. And since 2018, I've had the tremendous privilege of being the CIT coordinator throughout the state. That came about because I work in an extremely rural part of the state in a really small sheriff's office. And if it made sense to me, and really we'll show the map of Missouri in a little bit. My predecessor was the great Lieutenant Jeremy Romo with St. Louis County Police Department, again, one of the largest agencies in the state, had the ample resources and all of this stuff. So as when he transitioned out, they wanted the next coordinator to kind of have that rural perspective, because that's where the expansion needed to happen. So I've been fortunate enough to have the position since 2018. So what I'll do for you, and I don't want to go too elementary with this, I'm going to go through what we call our CIT overview. I do this so often in just outreach programs, letting people know about CIT, and it's the beginning of every 40-hour CIT class that I do. I'm going to skip through some of the history of CIT. I'm going to preach to the choir there, but we'll get to the main parts of kind of Missouri, what we do, what we take, kind of our model, our role. So I don't know if Rick, if I'm able to get to my, if sharing the screen, we'll see if I can get to that point here. All right, we transition okay there? Excellent. So kind of start out, obviously, the Memphis model. We are based in that CIT International model. However, we go against some things, go against the grain on some things, just because we need to make CIT fit for Missouri. We can obviously have those discussions in a little bit on some of the things that we do that may not be spot on with the international model as a whole. This is our kind of our mission statement here. Pretty basic, pretty straightforward. What we did add just a few years ago was the other first responder language there, because we have moved well beyond this being a law enforcement only program to include all other first responders. Obviously, dispatch would be including in that, but more importantly, our EMS and fire department brothers and sisters in the first responder world, because we co-respond to so many crisis calls that we feel training together, speaking the same language is extremely vital for that continuity of care in that response system alone. So, and then of course, our behavioral health providers, Angie talked about, our CBHLs, we'll talk about them a lot more in a little bit. Courts, we talk about diversion, all of this stuff. So this is all encompassing of what we try to do from a larger scope, I guess, of the Missouri model. We will talk about 5 goals of just that base 40-hour training, working with all of our first responders. And a lot of our training modules or programs are, again, not law enforcement. We co-train with community members. We co-train with certified peers. We co-train with other first responders, other entities, probation and parole, so many other areas and partnerships in the state. So our trainings have taken on a completely different look than what we really first started with, or even within the last 4 or 5 years. We have a really diverse group of, when you look at walk into a 40-hour CIT class, you will see multiple different agencies there, or kind of even professions. Obviously, safety first of that officer and individual in crisis. And we obviously it's about diversion here. And we want to divert from the criminal justice system, but we also focus on diverting from emergency departments or ERs, because we oftentimes the default was dropping them off and dumping those patients at an ER, and then what happens to them, and that's not right either. And I do not believe that emergency rooms are appropriate or really set up appropriately to handle that individual in crisis. So we have to look at a completely different model, of course, reducing stigma and then expanding CIT across the state. So probably to answer maybe the biggest question that maybe you have, if I were to make an assumption, is how do we do this model as a statewide model? CIT has been around in Missouri for I would say the mid 2000s. Really started on the Kansas side of the state, to be honest with you. I think there's some question on who lays the claim to having the first state training and the first state council, but definitely I think the western side of the state, the Kansas side, wins out. And then, but really it became a model of the haves and have-nots, and our map will clearly display that. But it was all very independent. Then probably in the 20, I don't know, Kimberly, help me answer this. A state council started to form, but there was no funding behind it. So what you see here are the dates of 2016. Really, I will back up to 2014, 2013, 2014. Our then governor, Jay Nixon, in response to the Sandy Hook shooting and other large, kind of critical events that were happening throughout the country, he basically said, "Not on my watch." And they put together what they call the Missouri Strengthening Mental Health Initiative throughout the state, a significant major funding mechanism. And there was 5 areas that they wanted to focus on. CIT was one of those focus areas. The other area that they wanted to put money to was the creation of these community mental health liaisons, which Angie just described, and Kim as well, as now community behavioral health liaisons. But it created 31 of those, and we'll see a slide that talks more about those. But really, for the first time, to create a funding mechanism to move both CIT, the CBHL program forward. Other funding mechanisms went into NAMI, went into creating an emergency room enhancement program, and also a kind of putting money towards that mental health first aid, 8-hour class. So really, for the first time, there was this funding opportunity. Then 2 years later, Department of Mental Health and the Missouri Behavioral Health Council, which of course Angie and Kim both represent, decided to find a law enforcement-led coordinator, CIT coordinator, to really be the point person for CIT throughout the state. And that was, as previously mentioned, Jeremy Romo, and that started in 2016. The Missouri model, kind of really started from that point of really being a facilitated conversation with a directive to really get CIT the best practice model all throughout the state. And that really started to take place. So that's kind of where that was at. The formation of I would say the more structured statewide council, the Missouri Crisis Intervention Team Council. Again, very important that it was law enforcement led, and it is still that to this day. We did mention, obviously, other first responder agencies, which are obviously key to this further development. DMH, the Missouri Behavioral Health Council. So in Missouri, we went from a state model to a community behavioral health model, which is obviously significantly important to treat individuals locally. That's nothing new, of course. But we wanted to, all of those behavioral health councils or those agencies look a little different. The services they offer, how big they are, their catchment area, how many counties they have. So it is a community model, but not all community models are created equal as well. So that creates some obstacles sometimes. Partnering with our hospitals, can mention something about that from a conversation yesterday. NAMI, of course, and then we've moved so far into other streams. Missouri Department of Corrections has an extremely robust CIT training within their own facilities. We train P&P staff, health and senior services, social services, children's division, just across the board. I really tell you, there's really not, if CIT can help them and they can help us, we're a partner. I mean, that's really kind of our take on things. Probably one of the biggest things that we took on back in 2016 was really developing a core curriculum. So like everything else, and I'm sure Kansas is no different, we don't like to reinvent the wheel, right? And put a lot of time and effort. Hell, if another state's doing something great, steal it. Of course, with written permission. But statute limitations generally is up on a lot of this stuff, so we're okay. But we wanted to make sure, so I'll give you a personal example. My first 40-hour class was in 2014 when I was I would say a young detective, but I wasn't very young. And that's when I went to my first 40-hour. And then we're like, well, where did this class originate from? Well, the class that I went through took it from this area, but they changed it a little bit. Well, they took it from this area who changed it a little bit. Well, what are we really teaching then? So we looked at what do we feel should be in a 40-hour class, what objectives need to be taught, and we came up with a 32-hour core curriculum with the additional 40 making up of electives. So if you have an area that have a high veteran population, you may want to spend 2 hours or more specifically dealing with that population. Maybe you have a group home or more developmental disability, type of concern in an area. Well, you might want to, expand upon that. So while the PowerPoints may look a little different, the instructors, localized experts may be a little different, we want to make sure that the objectives are the same. So if I say I'm a CIT officer on the eastern part of the state, I want to make sure that my counterparts on the western side of the state are going to have the same base training. Then we look at, we've developed in Kimberly, will not take, she's done so much work on developing our toolkit, which we'll talk about from our website perspective, defining local councils, consistent branding. When I went through CIT, I'm a sheriff's deputy. So my CIT pin that I was given from the state was brown. Well, right next to me was somebody who graduated the same class but represented a police department. They got a blue pin, right? Because we're all territorial that way, and those pins have to match your uniform. So they weren't really universal. So that bottom logo that you see, we decided to come up with a consistent logo so as we well know that individuals in crisis are somewhat transient, kind of move around quite a bit. So I want somebody to recognize that pin. It doesn't matter what color of uniform, but that pin needs to be consistent. So we have one logo, so that's truly identifiable. Our curriculum, again, we talked about that base 40-hour, but we've moved well beyond that. So we have developed an 8-hour concepts class that really take the main pieces and parts of a 40-hour, puts them down to 8. Doesn't make you a CIT officer, but we use it for a lot of different avenues. Maybe it's a refresher class. So again, if I only went through CIT in 2014, I probably need to, brush up on my skills. Well, this 8-hour class would be great for that. But maybe I'm an agency that's on the fence about doing a 40-hour class. I will do the 8-hour class and they're like, yeah, this makes great sense. I just received an email from one of my CBHLs about training this concepts class to EMS. They want us to come in and teach this 8-hour class to our EMS, first responders, which is great. Currently developing a standardized 2-day telecom class with the with 988 coming. That's going to change that entire process on how dispatchers take calls, transfer calls, work within the 988 system. So we're trying to develop very quickly a 2-day telecom class. We have a veterans youth, and we just developed a 20-hour jail class specifically for local sheriff's departments. We have a very high turnover rate in local jails. And with that, we know that most jail officers are also not commissioned officers. They're generally civilians. So sheriffs are very reluctant to invest in 40-hour training of CIT when they may not be there next week. So we want to develop a accessible class. 20 hours is what we settled on, and that's been we've trained it several times in the state, but yet to truly roll it out because of some minor adjustments we still need to make. So this is the map that I referred to a little bit earlier. So you see the then side, that's April of 2014. So this is right when that Strengthening Mental Health Initiative started. Along with that was the CMHL/CBHLs at the time as well. So again, if you know anything about the state, we have the eastern side, the Kansas, City area, Independence, St. Joe, all of that. Excuse me, the western side of the state. Eastern side, you have the greater St. Louis area. So NAMI St. Louis is very vital in the state. So they kind of were doing a lot of training in that St. Louis region. Right in the center, you have Columbia, and then you'll see Springfield, Greene County, Springfield. So those are our largest, cities in the state. So when I say that we're a state of the haves and have-nots, this map clearly shows that. So let me show you. If you're blue, that means you have an established CIT council and you have established, training. If you're yellow, that means you're expanding that way. Maybe then Sergeant Romo came down, and talked about expanding CIT, and you put together a group of stakeholders in a catchment area. And now you're starting to meet and talk about training and getting other stakeholders. So if you would look at what would be the eastern side of the state, the St. Louis area, you kind of go down the border there, you will see it's really hard to see, but it's almost a triangle. That's called Perry County. That's where I'm at. So in 2014, we were a establishing council, just meeting on a regular basis with what CIT would look like. I'll give you a little geography lesson there. But if you're white, nothing's going on. You're just doing law enforcement, struggling on every type of crisis call, not knowing 96-hour processes, all of that stuff. It's like every time you have that call, you're struggling to deal with it. Now you move over to June 2022, very current. We have 114 counties in the state. We currently have 9 counties, it looks like, that really do not have 8 counties, a CIT presence. Those are extremely rural, and really, to be honest with you, it might be the sheriff of the county or the chief, the largest area or the department is like, this is not law enforcement, we're not doing it. It's not mandatory in the state. Obviously, it's a best practice. We all know that, but that's kind of where we're at. So if you're still yellow, you're still expanding, but most of the state you will see really has a vested interest in CIT, has been ongoing CIT training, and we'll talk about our local councils in a little bit. I think one of you had mentioned that certain areas have more investment than others. We had a great discussion yesterday in the state about what does that investment look like? Can you put a definition to what CIT investment looks like? And we still struggle with that, but this is our best or closest representation of the CIT presence in the state. We have 30, I'm sorry, Kimberly, I think we have 33 councils. So what we recently had was one of our councils kind of merged with another one to create one council. So we really look at the local approach to this. I look at our job as a statewide council to support local CIT efforts, because CIT is so different in all parts of our state. One model will not work for everybody. So we advocate for local leadership, local development. And this is what we have here. We try to facilitate their needs and what we can do to help them out to become successful at the local level. And that's really where Angie, Kim, and myself work the hardest is to listen to them, be open and be available to them. And then, whatever their barriers are, we work at the state level with my working committee council, much like you guys are here, to help address those local concerns and to make sure that their success, so the state success, is really based upon local successes. It's not about what we do at the state level. It's about what happens in each and every one of those counties and each and every one of those local agencies. So this kind of, again, goes back to our CBHLs. We started in 2013, 2014 with 31 of them. We had 31 up until just about a year ago, when a lot of work that we were doing, and Angie will probably talk about the Justice Reinvestment Initiative in a little bit. We looked at where are our biggest barriers, and we needed more CBHLs to work directly with our law enforcement, courts, and our jails to do those referrals. When a CIT officer makes that referral, who do we refer to? We need a counterpart within our behavioral health profession that we know, that we trust, that's readily available, and you're looking at that group right there. But we are overwhelming them. So the governor heard this by a lot of different avenues, a lot of different messaging, and put forth an effort to expand that to an additional 50 almost a year ago, or a little more than a year ago, and we got that funding solidified. So you can see there on the left, work again with those current CBHLs to expand that, work with jail, courts, and law enforcement, assist in expansion. But something else that we do, that we have just recently started, that Kansas does great from a statewide perspective, and that's peer support, critical incident debriefings, things like that. So you have that model that I'm very jealous of. But we have implemented some of our CBHLs to assist with those critical events by having that clinician available for those debriefs, especially, and it's been very helpful. Again, this is the map of all of our community behavioral health centers. So each community behavioral health center with their catchment area is color coordinated. So initially, each one of those areas had one CBHL. Well, some areas are a little bit smaller than others. So you might have had one CBHL that was responsible for 3 rural counties, and then you may have had one CBHL responsible for 7 or 8 counties. So again, drive times, barriers, things like that were very difficult. As Kimberly mentioned, CBHLs were kind of initially looked at as that co-responder. Hey, CBHL, I'm going out on this crisis call. I need you to meet me there. They're like, well, I can't. I'm like 3 counties away working another crisis. I'm not available. Well, so then the best that we could do is send law enforcement, and whether that went into crisis or I filled out a CIT referral, forwarded to that CBHL, and they followed up with them, whenever they could at their convenience. So this is, again, geographically, it made sense to add CBHLs, and then this next slide justifies why the numbers needed more. So again, going back to 2014, the onset of CBHLs. And then keep in mind what that CIT map looked like in 2014. Again, the haves and the have-nots, most of it was white. We still had about 7,000 CIT referrals throughout the state in 2014. Again, most of those going to those highly populated areas, Kansas City, Springfield, Columbia, St. Louis. But as CIT began to expand, more officers were being trained in CIT. Well, that obviously was going to make more referrals. So as you see the years here, our training increased, CIT expansion was occurring, our CIT referrals, kept going up. So from 2014 to 2021, more than doubled. Obviously, you see 2020, we went down. Well, I don't have to talk about what 2020 was and why there probably was a dip there due to COVID, but those numbers kept increasing. Therefore, we needed to more than double our CBHLs. So then we'll go back to that local council. What does that look like? How do you become a local council? We want you to meet for about a year, at least a year, I guess, from a local council standpoint. We want you to have a good group of stakeholders. We obviously still want it law enforcement led. We want you to have CIT trained officers in that area. That does not mean that you have to train your own. We can send those officers to another regional training or another council who does training. So that's not the really a criteria for us. Obviously implement the Missouri model and kind of attend our statewide meetings. We have 6 meetings a year that we hold in Jeff City, but we also offer that virtual option to be part of that conversation. So attending 4 of 6 of those a year, and then ultimately, describing why you have met this criteria and why you should be voted on as really an established council. So really, it's pretty easy to become a local council. My job is to make sure that those local councils, I help them get established. I help them identify key stakeholders. I help them with agendas. I help them, what does those conversations look like from that local level? And this is what that looks like. It's really about team collaboration at the local level. Again, going back to focusing on local areas. Case studies are extremely important because we have to remind ourselves, why do we do CIT? And it's really for the end user of that individual in crisis, that how can we respond best to them? How can we put the best services in place? But we got to know about those services, those resources, again, locally. So determine best practices. We do agency spotlights every month in my council, my local council. We try to identify a unknown resource and bring them to the table, and then have them, talk about who they are, how long they've been established, things like that, and how can we use them, as a resource. And then of course, training, event calendars, things like that. We really want to promote the work of those local councils, within their region, or within their catchment areas. This is, Kimberly, this brings me to a point we got to update this slide right here, because Kimberly's working very hard to update our CIT website. We wanted a centralized location that all councils could go to updated information. So this is just a screenshot of what that used to look like. We'll bring up the website here in a minute. You see some, the home, Missouri Council's trainings, all drop-down menus, and we'll talk about the toolkit here briefly. I'm going to go on a side tangent. Something else that we're doing with Missouri, with officer wellness, self-care. So Gladys, I maybe you'll, might be interested in this. So something that we knew was coming was this wave of peer support. It's important, obviously, that officers recognize and get trained and can help take care of their own. But we also knew, like, where do we go with those individuals when those officers do finally identify or reach out that they need assistance? So before we kind of focus on training, we focus on, again, much like a diversion in CIT, divert to what? Who can those officers go to? So we started in about 2018, and you may know Major Darren Ivy recently retired with Kansas City, Missouri Kansas City PD. He talked about this first responder provider, culturally competent clinicians. So we developed an application, and we really identified 1 provider, 2 providers, 3, and then it kind of went on from there. We now are over 40 vetted, culturally competent clinicians within the state that we know that are dedicated to serving first responders or have an understanding of that first responder culture, and that they focus on trauma response. And that could be EMDR, that could be any number of things that these providers really have a heart to serve. So if I am a peer support officer and I have an officer in crisis, I don't want to just recommend, you need to go out and call your EAP and see who they come up with. Or, hey, there's a provider down the street, good luck with them, type of thing. We want to make sure that we have a self-referral process for those officers to go to. And really, that's what this list is. Again, over 40 vetted. We also are in the process of vetting facilities, retreat centers, things along those lines. So obviously, you're probably familiar with, a couple different, models. In fact, I think we have one of them from the Kansas City area on there. We support, CISM training, things like that. Recently, we'll talk, can talk about a bill that was recently passed for officer wellness in Missouri. With that became a large funding mechanism, and they have contracted with Warriors Rest Foundation to come into Missouri to specifically teach CISM training. We'll talk about what the Missouri Highway Patrol has been doing for many years to promote that. One other area that we recently have been involved in is a PCIS events, post-critical incident stress seminars in Missouri, where it's a 3-day, basically, I don't know if you're familiar with PCISs, but where officers who've been involved in critical events or accumulated traumas throughout a career can go all free, hotels provided, all of this. We have some of our FRPN members who provide free EMDR therapies, peers that are there. So it's really a great therapeutic 3-day event that truly is life-changing. Missouri Department of Corrections recently hosted their first PCIS for their correctional staff, but the one that the Highway Patrol sponsors is not just for law enforcement. We offer this up to other first responders, fire, EMS, and it's really awesome how it doesn't matter. We kind of all come at it from the same angle. So our next one's in Branson. We just had a call today. We're at 37. I call it sold out, maxed out, because obviously we want to keep those numbers relatively low. And then the next one will be in 2023 in Branson. We hold a conference every single year, a 2-day, really 1.5 to 2-day conference in Columbia. Next year will be our 9th annual. During COVID, we transitioned to virtual for 2 years, but last year we had right at 500 participants. So we have major keynote speakers that come in, do breakouts that really focus on hot topics, things like that in Missouri. So we focus on a conference, and again, just whatever we can do as an overall statewide council to facilitate CIT expanding throughout the state is obviously what we try to focus on. Let me see if I can get our website up just real quick. Sorry about that. I do not see it.
Yeah, this is really terrific. Lots of things running through my head, and I assume that's the case for our board members as well. And
well, a lot of information there, and I know it was a real quick, real fast, but I definitely wanted to provide some time, to either go back on any one of those things or just kind of explore anything else that kind of resonated a little bit.
well, I certainly have some questions that I've been keeping track of, but I'd like to defer to Aaron and Jeff and Gladys. But do we need to hear from Angie and Kimberly first, or what were your plans, Jason?
Yeah. So yeah, I will definitely open up. So I obviously both of them are so key in what we do. And Angie, I referenced the JRI a little bit, a lot of our initiatives. So if you want to briefly talk about that, because so many different things are working in Missouri right now that really push all of these initiatives, kind of bringing it all together to ultimately get it in front of the governor. And when you get something in front of the governor, that equals funding. Funding equals sustainability. Sustainability means, just long-term, crisis response.
Yeah, I think what brought us to this point in time of having this conversation with you guys, my sense anyway, is the sustainability funding structure kinds of questions that the board is coming to grips with. So some of the questions that I've made notes of relate to that, and we'll see what the board members want to ask about. But Angie, I think most of us are probably familiar with sequential intercept model, but go ahead. What do you want to share with us?
I was just going to share that we do have a Justice Reinvestment Initiative work group that is looking at crisis response around the state. And one of the most recent developments is that we are going to do a sequential intercept model mapping in each county in the state. So we've just started with that. We got some funding to do that. And CIT is the central repository basically in each county that's going to make sure the stakeholders are there. The judge in each county is the convener. So they will be sending out letters to each stakeholder to make sure that they're at the table. So I think that's one of the biggest things that we're doing at the moment that I think will also expand CIT.
That's actually one thing that we had done here in Wyandotte County. We partnered with Samson Gain Center, and they sent a couple of representatives out, and we were actually able to get all the stakeholders in our area to come to our behavioral health center and meet in our conference area. And we spent 2 days going through a sequential mapping with them, and that was really, I think, one of the huge, most solid foundations, building points for our CIT program, because it really seemed to launch after that. And I mean, we had the go ahead on our CIT co-responder to go, but I mean, that also launched a community corrections liaison, our jail and court liaison position. It really brought even our parole department for DOC. We have a DOC office in Wyandotte, KCK, and we were able to bring them into it too. So we had our city and our state courts and everybody there. So it was huge. So yeah, that'll be great if everybody can get on with that.
So Angie, you talked about funding to do sequential intercept mapping in every county. That sounds enormous. I mean, roughly what level of funding is required to do that in all the counties?
You know, that was a Missouri Foundation for Health application that we submitted, and it was only a couple $100,000, but it supports a coordinator through the court system to make sure that they're getting the judges together and all on the same page and making sure they are the convener, because I think that's key to getting people to the table. And then also just to, I mean, lunch and breakfast and coffee and things
Right.
like that, because we know if we feed them, they will come.
Gotcha.
So, you know, it's also, we've got at least 70, they did a trainer in Missouri. So we've got at least 70 people that are trained, and we're going to do one more of those where we have at least regional trainers that can do these sequential intercept models. So we don't have to partner with PRA or have someone from a federal agency come in and do those. So yeah, those are, and I can provide more information on that if you need it.
Well, I'm mindful of the time and our kind of agreement to run till noon. I just want to see Aaron and Jeff and Gladys. You know, I don't know if we'll answer all questions or whether may have to follow up with Jason with some of mine, but I want to defer to our board members to see what you're curious about based on what you've heard so far.
I did jot down a couple questions. Is Missouri, have they passed the 988? So do you guys answer 988 lines out in Missouri?
I mean, if someone dials 988, it will go to that right now, but I mean, officially the kickoff is next month.
Oh, okay. And I was just kind of curious what kind of planning you guys are preparing for that, or if, or what are you guys anticipating from that?
Yeah, there's a whole task force with 5 or 6 subcommittees that are meeting monthly, some of them weekly, just to get ready for that. And if you need connections with that 988 coordinator in Missouri, I can make that happen.
Yeah, that was one of my questions. It's kicking off here, and then as I kind of mentioned, where I'm employed at right now is we do primarily televideo type services, and I know across the nation there's different grants and funding out there to do televideo services, especially in the rural areas. And I think this was originated in Florida. I think they gave out iPads to officers where there was maybe a behavioral health staffing crisis. Is that something that you guys, and I apologize if I missed that, no. Is that something you guys are using or utilizing? Has that been successful for you guys? And
so Angie and I, she's probably like, are you going to answer this or am I? We looked at this really hard about a year ago, maybe a little bit more. So sporadically in Missouri, certain counties have implemented the iPad assessment approach, working with individual departments and so we have another system in Missouri called ACI, Access Crisis Intervention. So when you go back to that I've showed you a lot of maps, but the one, you know, that looks like a big rainbow, most of those, it kind of follows that a little bit, but each of our providers contract with 24/7, 365 crisis line. So it's essentially like 988, and it will be just kind of broke down. Whereas some of those, and we ran in some of those barriers with if we were going to write a grant to deploy iPads throughout the state. Now, much like Kansas, Missouri is extremely rural. We worried about connectivity. We worried about an iPad being chucked in an officer's patrol car, only to be ruined, destroyed, lost, whatever. So we identified almost too many barriers that to invest that money in long-term stability. So we kind of moved away from it. But just next door in my agency, I have one, and we mainly use it that when I bring somebody into physical custody for that assessment, if that person is you know, responsive to it, we will do a tele-assessment of that. Use it a lot in my jail, to be honest with you. You know, when I have an inmate in crisis, we will do that assessment through iPad in my jail facility. But as far as a statewide model of deploying the iPads, we were really on the verge of doing that, and I know Oklahoma is doing a lot of it as well. But we just decided to move away from that, you know, for the time being.
Thank you. Yeah.
And Gladys, anything on your mind as you're listening today?
Yeah, I want to make sure I followed correctly. There was a piece where you were talking about, you know, after you've done the CIT
So Gladys,
training,
you're breaking up.
advanced,
Hey Gladys, you're breaking up pretty bad.
part of it, as far as, you know, additional ongoing training. Did you say that you had? Yes.
Jason, was
this better?
Gladys breaking up on your end as well?
Can y'all hear me
Yeah,
now?
I apologize. I couldn't hear. The last I heard was ongoing training. Okay, and based upon that, because I'm a detective and I make a lot of assumptions, which I shouldn't. Maybe about training a 40-hour class, and what does that officer have to continue to do to sustain? Are you a credentialed CIT officer? Things like that. We made the decision, or a decision maybe was not made many years ago, that when you go through a 40-hour class, like, we don't make you go back through every 3 years, or in order to keep that pin that you have to do this 8-hour every 3 years or something along those lines. I think it was a mistake, but we've been training so much, it's really hard to kind of go back to that model. So what we've tried to do is we do a lot of training, because I truly believe, unlike CIT International, that I don't want just that officer who wants to be a CIT trained officer, because Missouri is very rural and some agencies have 1 to 2 officers. They're going to find themselves on a CIT call, and I need them to have that skill set and that understanding. We offer up all of these other classes, the advanced classes, conferences, things like that. So when you do want to be that CIT and you really understand it, we want you to be active in those other training options. But it's not something that we track, or I'm not what I call the pin police, that if I give you a CIT pin and I've not seen you at another class in 3 years, I'm coming for you and I'm going to depin you. That's not something that we got into. And Gladys, I don't know if that's what your question was or not, but
yeah, no, you were kind of right on track. The parts that I didn't also get to add, so you definitely answered a part of my question. I appreciate that. Was I think one of the subcategories I saw in your slide had to do with youth.
yes.
Did I see that correctly? Where you, okay. So we, in our community, obviously made national news. Our juvenile detention facility had an unfortunate incident where a young man did not make it. And so, long story short, the task force that really has been
Yeah, something with your connection, Gladys.
emphasizing.
Yeah, we're not hearing you. Yeah, you might want to put something in the chat, Gladys, because you're breaking up pretty bad. Hey, Gladys. Hey, well, hey,
within that setting. So I just kind of
Gladys, can you hear me, Gladys?
Um, as far as the advanced piece, if you all had established, curriculum for.
So I think we should move on. Gladys, if you can hear me, maybe.
In there.
So Rick,
Go
this
ahead.
is Kimberly. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Kimberly.
So I just wanted to mention a couple of things that I think you guys were really, really interested in and I think might help with some closure with this call. And that is what I would like to say is Missouri is very unique with our funding structure because of the Missouri Behavioral Health Council. A lot of the funding that allows us to do what we do is because of the Missouri Behavioral Health Council. We also are very unique and stand out from other states because of our unique partnerships with key stakeholders. So you won't find in a lot of states the Department of Mental Health working so very closely with the council. Same thing with Missouri Medicaid. We have very strong partnerships and relationships, Department of Health and Senior Services, Department of Corrections, Missouri State Highway Patrol. It has taken a long time to develop these relationships. They've developed over time. I do think that a lot of that has to do with the people that do hold the jobs within Missouri CIT and within the other organizations. There is a lot of passion, a lot of very dedicated individuals that do not have work boundaries. We're real bad at self-care because we work really hard to try to advance all of our initiatives. But for me, the takeaway for you guys is just the collaboration and the partnerships that we have that allow the funding for us to be able to do what we do. Prior to the Missouri Behavioral Health Council being given this charge and providing a full-time staff person, which is me, they would meet regularly and they would say, oh, we should have a conference, we should do this, we should do that. But they were law enforcement professionals, and so they go back to their jobs, saving lives. They don't have time to put on a conference. They don't have time to put together these trainings. So we did have to establish, our council had to revise the bylaws, had to get administrative support involved. And that enabled us to do the things that we need to do. We take direction from the first responders, but having the administrative support and then also being able to have a counterpart like Angie Plunkett with the Department of Mental Health is key to make sure that we are advancing the initiative the way that we need to, and that those dollars are being spent the best way that we can. We have the cheapest conference in the nation, $50 for a 2+ day conference, all meals. They get t-shirts, they get, we provide them with a lot of swag and a lot of education. So that would not happen without my employer.
Right. Well, I think, those relationships may be unique, but they may also be things that we could develop or model here. I see we're at our time boundary, and then Gladys, if you're hearing us, maybe anything that didn't come across in your last question, maybe if you would send it to me in an email. What I would like to do with Jason's permission is send my remaining questions to you so we can have some follow-up by email. Then that'll be some additional material that I can share with the board, along with Gladys's last question and anything else that's occurring to Jeff and Aaron. If you would send it to me, I'll put that in a message to Jason. And it would be great, Jason, in your reply, if you would copy Angie and Kimberly, so we'll know how to get a hold of them and we can follow up with them as needed. I think we've got a lot of growth and, questions. We're kind of at a kind of pivotal crossroads in the development of the association now, and all of this, I think, will be extremely helpful. Any last words from any folks on the Kansas side or from the Missouri side?
I just want to thank you guys for your time. This is really helpful, and I appreciate it. And great job on everything that you're doing. That's fantastic. You guys have really come a huge way. So that's awesome. It's very inspiring. Thanks.
Well, thank you guys for your time, energy, commitment, enthusiasm. I think we're going to take a close look at everything. And Jason, I'll follow up with you in a day or two with some questions. And Aaron and Jeff and Gladys, if you have anything you want me to include, please send that along at your earliest opportunity. So appreciate everyone's time today, and we'll end the recording and share this with our folks. And I trust you'll be hearing from us again. And
Yep,
good luck.
anytime.
Good luck in
Yeah.
your work.
Good to meet you guys. Thank you.
Anytime. Yeah. Reach out. Thank you all.
Well,
Okay.
thank you.
Have a great day.